Welcome back everyone to the channel, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the Sony 24-105 f4G lens. So in this video I'm just going to be covering some of my experience with this lens, what I use with this lens, some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses of this lens. And no, I am not here to convince you to buy this lens, I'm just here to let you know what I feel and how I like to use this lens. And of course why I got this lens in the first place. So of course I'll start off with explaining what this lens is. So this is the 24-105 G lens, and this is a full frame lens from Sony. It is part of the G series lens, so not a G Master, just a G. So as you'll know, the 24-105 is kind of like the mid-range zoom lens. So not quite the long lens, but not quite the widest, so it's kind of in between. For the most part, 24mm is wide enough to do a lot of landscape and a lot of very wide pictures. And 105mm is good enough to do some really good compression to get some good portrait. And it is good enough to do some, I guess, telephoto photos. As you can see, 24-105 covers a lot of range, so it's actually really good for a lot of things. And because it is an f4 lens, a lot of people do think that it's not quite wide enough for low light situations. But from my experience, if you're using a full frame camera with this lens, you're probably going to get enough ISO to bump up the light and make it quite bright. So I'll actually show you some of the photos I've taken in low light situations with this lens a little bit further down the video. So I have used this lens for quite a few things in the past, like astro and some photo shoots I've done in the past. The best thing about this lens is literally the range of this lens. It covers so much zoom range that I actually bring it for a lot of my travel photography and actually carry it around for most of the places, and I actually use it for a lot of my shoots. So I've taken this lens to Hawaii, to Japan, to Melbourne, and I actually take this lens with me when I go hiking. So if you're looking for a lens that is kind of versatile and you can take it to most places, I would actually recommend this lens. Apart from this, you could probably look into the 24-70 f4 or the f2.8 depending on your budget. I'm not going to tell you how sharp this lens is because there are plenty of videos out on YouTube that tells you how sharp this lens is, and it will actually have some videos that probably do some pixel peaking for you. But all I'm going to say is this lens is pretty sharp and probably the sharpest lens I've had. So it does sound like I use this lens for everything, for photo shoots to when I shoot videos for people, for my clients. But there are some downsides to this lens, and there are some things that I will not use this lens for. A good example of this is I will not put this lens on a gimbal unless I'm going to be leaving it on the 24mm range. And the reason for that is this lens actually extends when you're zooming out or zooming into something. So if you're going to have it zoomed in and you put the lens on a gimbal, there's a chance that it might just knock into the gimbal frame, and that might damage the lens and cause a lot of problems. And I kind of don't want to put $1,000 or this lens but $2,000 lens on a gimbal that might get damaged. Now that I have mentioned the price, let's just start talking about it. So this lens is definitely not cheap. To be honest, no Sony lens is cheap. This lens is about $1,000 US. And if you're in Australia, this lens is going to be about $1,700. So yeah, that is probably one of the biggest disadvantages. It is quite an expensive lens. But if you're planning to do a lot of this lens, it's probably not that expensive if you're going to put it in perspective, depending on how many lenses you're going to buy. Apart from all the great things about this lens, I get one of the questions for this lens is, how much blur or bokeh can I get from this lens? Because it is an f4. And the answer to that is surprising to me, and you can actually get quite a lot of blur with an f4 with this lens. Especially if you're going to zoom all the way out to 105mm and with a subject and a background kind of distant away, then you're going to get a really nice blur. So I guess it all comes down to how you frame the subject and how you want to, I guess, play around with your photos. But the answer to that question is yes, you can get a lot of blur. Another question I see the internet always asking is, how is this lens in low light situations? And I guess f4 doesn't really open up wide enough for you to use it for low light situations, but it also comes down to what kind of camera you're using. So if you're using the Sony S series, which is pretty much the best low light camera you can get on the market, then this is not going to be a problem. If you're going to be using the Sony A7 III, then that's going to be pretty good as well. However, once you start using the Sony R series, you might have a little problem, but still you're going to get pretty good results with it regardless. And because this lens is kind of new, so it was released back in 2017, so it is pretty good with the autofocusing, and if I can say, this is probably very fast autofocusing, so you're not going to have any problem with it focusing properly and getting your subject in focus. So the reason why I take this lens for traveling is because I just need to carry one lens instead of carrying 3 or 4 lenses that is going to cover the same focal length. So if I have this lens, I probably won't carry anything wider because I think 24 is quite wide enough. If anything, I'll probably carry a 70 to 200 or 70 to 180 Tamron lens after this. So you're quite covered with just one lens, and the other one is just if you want to shoot something that is further away, if you're going to be doing some wildlife or doing some portrait with it. Otherwise, you can get something even wider, so you might pair it up with a 16 to 35mm, also an f4 if you want. So yeah, it really depends on what you want to do if you're traveling, but I reckon 24 to 105 is definitely good enough as just a run and gun, one lens that does everything. So this is going to be it for me. Let me know if you have any questions about this lens or if there's anything that I didn't cover. If you are planning to buy this lens and haven't got it yet, let me know what are the reasons why you haven't pulled the trigger. I'm not here to convince you to buy this lens. I just want you to make the best choice before you spend $1,000 on such an expensive lens. And obviously you don't want to be sinking $1,000 into a lens that you might not going to be using. So let me know in the comment below what you want to know about this lens and if I missed anything. That's it for now. See you next time.